Well, many of the things that we discussed 10 years ago are becoming true now. We spoke about Iran. Well, we decided to turn counterterrorism into an academic subject. And we turned counterterrorism into an academic subject 4 years before 9/11, before counterterrorism became popular. And Professor Boaz Ganor of IDC Herzliya convinced the president of the university, Professor Uriel Reichman, that basically counterterrorism is an academic subject. It's an interdisciplinary subject, which includes aspects of psychology and international relations and communications and finance and economics and chemistry and biology. All of these different things combined are part of counterterrorism. And by turning counterterrorism into an academic subject and researching all of these different areas, I think it helps you focus more on what's happening in the world of counterterrorism. It's not just the Middle East that's becoming a nightmare. I think Europe is becoming a nightmare. Why? Because there's a basic premise in the jihadism that they would like to spread Islam throughout the world. So there are groups like this who wish to do it. I mean, they may be a minority of the people who make up the Islamic world, but there's this small minority of individuals who are very aggressive and are willing to perform acts of terrorism in order to achieve their goals. That's why, for example, there are thousands of Europeans fighting with ISIS right now. In the last war, the students, 600 students, volunteered, speaking 22 different languages, because 1/4 of our student body is international students from the Rafael Recanati International School, which I'm the head of. So basically what happened is the students got together and opened an operations room that was working in shifts around the clock. And what they did is they were using tweets and using Facebook and using all kinds of connections around the world to make the case for Israel. And they were using all kinds of sources, but they were turning all of this into the actual language of the students, which made it a very, very credible kind of message. So we had Norwegian students speaking in Norwegian to the Norwegian public, Swedish students speaking in Swedish, Finnish students speaking in Finnish, Danish, Germans, people speaking Portuguese, Spanish, Chinese, English of different accents to the United States, to Great Britain, to Canada, to Australia, to South Africa. And in the end, we ended up reaching 40 million people, making the case for Israel. So we consider ourselves to be a Zionistic university. We are a university which believes in training future leaders for the state of Israel and for the Jewish world and for the world at large. And right now I'm in Mexico. We've visited most of the high schools here. This morning I was at a university called ITAM. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a private university. Reminds me a little bit of IDC Herzliya. It's private, non-profit, very entrepreneurial. And we're also looking to recruit students here from Mexico to come and achieve some academic degrees at IDC Herzliya. They can always come back to Mexico afterwards, better trained in entrepreneurship, because we're teaching actually business and economics and communications and psychology, and we're teaching all of these subjects in English. And all of these same subjects that we teach in Hebrew, we're also teaching in English. We have a wonderful master's degree now in counterterrorism, which is full of students from around the world, from every single continent in the world that you can imagine. We've got a master's degree in financial economics. And IDC is located inside the Israeli Silicon Valley, basically, which is that whole Herzliya region of all of the high-tech and the startup nation region. So the people who come to IDC are also getting a taste of the entrepreneurial spirit of the place. We're the only master's degree in counterterrorism in Israel, and we hold this annual conference on counterterrorism, which you, Mai, have attended on a number of occasions. And we're glad that you are our Mexican representative there, and we look forward to having you at future conferences. And I can tell you that yes, we're strong believers in analyzing the counter-terrorist aspects so that we can help the world fight terrorism. Terrorism needs to be fought not just on the battlefield of armies. It also needs to be analyzed, and we also need to discuss how to lower the motivation of those terrorists, because ultimately countries have to take decisions, and we have to find a way to work all together in order to avoid terrorism. Something that did not happen in 9/11, when there were not enough countries sharing information, or even various organizations within the United States. Now we realize that we all have to share information, that we have to work together, and it's something which we have to fight and really defeat. We're lucky that Israel's been very, very quiet, relatively, because we've basically learned, because of our experience, how to try and deter the terrorists from committing acts of terrorism in the state of Israel. Well, many of our graduates who graduate IDC Herzliya go to work around the world. Many of them are not Israelis, and many of them are from different countries. So we have graduates of ours working in think tanks in Washington, D.C. We have some working for security services. We have some working in the foreign ministries of different countries in diplomacy. I know that the IDC Herzliya right now has 11 graduates working in the United Nations in New York. And all of that area of international relations and diplomacy and government, we're producing graduates also who go to do graduate school PhDs. We have our graduates studying at all the Ivy League universities in the United States: Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton. We have students at Stanford, Washington University of St. Louis, Duke, Cambridge, Oxford. Many of them are working on graduate degrees and PhDs. Some of them, when they complete their PhDs, are coming back to IDC Herzliya to teach, so they're coming full circle. And others are working in key places. But we don't only teach counterterrorism. We teach business, we teach entrepreneurship, we teach economics, and many of our graduates are in key business positions. And we're very, very strong on entrepreneurship. The Adelson family has just made a contribution to IDC Herzliya, and we have established the Adelson School for Entrepreneurship at IDC Herzliya. It's a great school. And I can tell you that graduates of IDC Herzliya who have been involved in startup companies have made exits over the last few years of $250 million. So just like Israel is number 3 on NASDAQ, as far as the number of companies in the world, IDC Herzliya is very, very strongly on the map with regards to students who are involved in startups and entrepreneurship and this kind of thing. Well, the benefits of studying at IDC Herzliya are that the classes are relatively small, and also that the professor is basically the partner of the student. I know some universities where the professors say if there were no students here, the university would be a great place because the students are nudniks, or they bother us. We could be getting Nobel Prizes if these students weren't bothering us all the time. The philosophy of IDC Herzliya is that the professor needs to delve into research, but at the same time be very user-friendly to the students. So at IDC Herzliya, for example, there's no faculty club. The students and the professors eat together. And if there are hours when the professor needs to meet the students, they'll meet the students, they'll speak to the students, they'll converse with the students, they'll interact with the students, because that's basically the philosophy of IDC Herzliya. So you'll find the president of the university or deans or myself waiting in line with trays, and there can be students ahead of us in line, and we're all eating in the same cafeteria. And you can be capitalist and believe in free enterprise, but at the same time take a very humane attitude towards the students. So that's another very, very positive thing. The other positive thing I would say about studying at IDC Herzliya is this entrepreneurial spirit. That everywhere you go, whatever you're studying, you could be studying psychology, or you could be studying communications, or you could be studying sustainability or law, or anything. The one common denominator is that we ask of our students to show initiative, to be entrepreneurs, and to come out of the university hitting the ground running, to become future leaders, and to make an impact on society. The other thing is that I think that the good thing about IDC is that it's reminiscent of a small, I would say, prestigious New England kind of college in the United States. But the beauty is that it's in Israel. So you benefit from being able to be in Israel. I mean, we're not far from the beach, and like your son was just saying, we have some very nice pubs in Herzliya. For example, we read Megillat Esther on Purim at a pub. So our students were holding a glass of beer, and a rabbi was reading Megillat Esther in the pub. Okay, so that's the kind of spirit that we have. The other thing is that many of our Israeli students are combat officers in elite units of the IDF. So many of them are pilots, and many of them are in leadership roles in the IDF. And so to have them on campus is also a very, very nice mix, together with all of the international students. The Mexican students are doing great, but we'd like to see more, because we have 8 students from Guatemala, and we have 40 students from Colombia, and we have 35 students from Venezuela, and we have about 15 students both from Peru and from Ecuador. We've got 5 students from Bolivia. We have 30 students from Brazil. We have 20 from Argentina, but we only have 5 or 6 from Mexico. So we need to create some jumping bean activity around here and get more Mexicans to study with us. So we've been going around different high schools here and speaking to people. We'd like to see 20 or 25 Mexicans studying with us. We have 50 British students, 300 French students, 60 German students, 70 Canadians, 550 students from the United States of America. So we'd like to see Mexico more on the map. Just like Mexico gets a lot of medals in the Maccabiah because they're very good athletes. So we'd like to see more Mexicans coming to IDC Herzliya. They can come back to the community. They can become future leaders of the community. They can improve their professional abilities by studying all of the things which we offer in English. And I think we're making some waves here. We're making some impact here. Some people are listening to us. Well, I think the Mexican students are disciplined. They're well-mannered. They come from a good education, because so many of them have been through Jewish high school education, and so they appear to be committed to Jewish identity, and some of them are also committed to Zionism. And you can actually see that the Mexican Jewish community has very little intermarriage, for the very, very simple reason that they're promoting Jewish identity all over the place. The United States has an intermarriage rate of 50 to 60%. I don't think Mexico has more than 5% intermarriage rate in the community here, from what I can see. And so I think that's a result of the investment the community's been making in all of these educational aspects here. I think the community can be very, very proud of it. The other thing which I think is very unique to this community is that you have communities from different countries. You know, some of them are coming from Syrian background. It could be Damascus, or it could be Khalib, but you also have Sephardi people here from Sephardi background. They're coming from Turkey. They're coming from the Balkan areas. You have Ashkenazi people here, and all of these communities, basically, at the end of the day, they unite under one umbrella, and they have a board. And I think it's a very good example for other communities in the world to follow, how they all get along with each other. And at the end of the day, they realize the importance of what they're doing here. How I became the head of the international school, of the Raphael Recanati International School, because Professor Uriel Reichman, who's the president of IDC, 14 years ago hired me. I was then working at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for about 8 years. So I jumped ship, and I came to IDC Herzliya. I mean, I love the Hebrew University dearly, and it's my alma mater, and I studied there, and I worked there. But there's something very, very exciting about working in a private but non-profit university like IDC Herzliya, because there's much less bureaucracy, because you're able to get things done in a hurry, and because you feel like you're building something brand new in the country. Even now, a number of members of the Knesset are graduates of IDC Herzliya. Orly Levy, who is now a member of the Knesset, and Meirav Ben-Ari, who is a new member of the Knesset now from the Kahalon party of Kulanu, and we have 4 members of the Knesset right now from IDC Herzliya. So we're slowly making an impact. We're only 20 years old, but we're slowly making an impact on Israeli society, and it's fun to be there. Anat Berko, who is one of the professors at IDC Herzliya in counterterrorism, she's now a member of the Knesset from the Likud. And Ambassador Michael Oren, who was teaching at IDC Herzliya, he became a member of the Knesset as well. So, you know, we're a little house on the prairie, but we have a big impact. I gave a small lecture here about what I thought personally regarding the elections. I think that the Israelis who make the exit polls and do the surveys on assessing who's going to receive what number of mandates, they were completely wrong. They assessed completely wrong. I think that this election was an election where people personalized too much and they demonized too much. And when you personalize people too much and you attack people too much on a personal level, and when you demonize too much, you sometimes can create a backlash. I think there was a backlash of sorts. At a certain stage, when you start exaggerating too much, people start reacting in a different way. They're not taking necessarily what the press are saying in a credible way. If there's too much of that going on, that's one aspect. The other aspect is that the party, which was comprised of the Labour Party and Tzipi Livni, which basically was the party that, on its mission statement, was going to bring the social services to places like Ashkelon and Beersheba, and to development towns, and to Dimona and Yerucham and places like this. It is those people who voted for the Likud. In other words, the recipients of the mission statement of the Labour Party, those who were supposed to be helped, were all voting for the Likud. And one would have expected in places like Ashkelon and places like Sderot and places like Ashdod, that who had rockets launched on them from Gaza, and from what one read in the press, one got an impression from reading the press that these people were extremely angry at Netanyahu, angry at the Likud, and that the polls said that basically the Likud was going to lose this election. And these same people, I guess, felt that the leadership of Netanyahu was superior to the leadership of Herzog or Livni, because this election was determined by those people from the periphery to a great extent. So you take a place like Kfar Shmariyahu, which is the highest socioeconomic level of Israel. 53% of Kfar Shmariyahu voted for Herzog and Livni. But you go to a place like Beersheba or Ashkelon or the development towns and some of the poorer regions of Israel, there you saw 40-50% of the population voting for the Likud, and only a very small minority voting for the Labour Party. And I think this is something which the Labour Party is now taking into consideration in Israel, and they're reassessing much of their decision making to a great extent. And it's not necessarily that people love Netanyahu or think he's necessarily a nice guy or a bad guy. I think they were voting for a certain philosophy. I think that, for example, there are some Israelis afraid of what's going on in the Middle East, and they were looking for someone to stand tall and not to be embarrassed to defend Israel, even though some of it may not have looked politically correct. And obviously, even though there are economic problems in Israel, the economic problems in Israel, I guess, aren't bad enough for people to vote against the Likud. There is a per capita income of $38,000 a year in Israel. You see a lot of Israelis going to coffee shops. There is a huge gap between the rich and the poor in Israel. That's true. And a lot of things need to improve. But I guess, I'm saying from a personal point of view, that the situation in Israel is not so bad that they all had to vote against the existing government of the Likud. So these are all things to, I guess, take into consideration. These are all things which I'm seeing on the ground. So, but these are all my personal views. I'm not giving you my own personal political view. I'm just trying to analyze things on an objective basis here. Why did Netanyahu win? Netanyahu won because I think he projected strength in the area of security. He went to Congress in the United States and spoke out so that the world could hear the danger of Iran. I'm not sure, by the way, that speech brought him too many mandates in Israel. But at the same time, this was part of his raison d'etre. I also believe that there is a chance with this government to get a few things done, because the government now is going to be a more homogeneous government. So Kachlon is going to become the Minister of the Treasury, and he's going to have the mandate for the Land Authority and the Ministry of the Treasury, just like Kachlon lowered the price of cell phones in Israel and revolutionized the Israeli communications world. He may revolutionize now the real estate world in Israel, and if he has 2 or 3 years to do it, he may actually be able to lower the price of apartments in Israel, which is something which we need to do. And as crazy as it sounds, Kachlon has 10 mandates. And the Haredi parties have another 14 mandates. All these Haredi parties care is social services for the poor because they're very, very poor. Together with Kachlon, all of a sudden you have 24 members of the Knesset who are an interest group that wants to do things for those of lower socioeconomic levels in Israel. So there's going to be a strong lobby within the Likud now to improve the economic situation. And I think the Israeli public votes with their feet. That's it in a nutshell. I don't think that Netanyahu actually said he's against a two-state solution. I think what Netanyahu said, from what I recall, I think it was taken a little out of context. He basically said that with the situation in the Middle East the way it is right now, with the Hamas in power in Gaza, with the potential of firing rockets into Israel because they still have 4,000 rockets left, with the situation in Judea and Samaria the way it is, and with the situation of the negotiations the way they are right now with the Palestinians, that right now, this second, a two-state solution is not a viable thing. But he does not necessarily mean, in my view, that a two-state solution is something that won't take place in the future. So if our partners wish to be, let's say, more reasonable partners and more practical partners, and if we are courageous enough and they are courageous enough to sit together, I believe that Netanyahu does intend to have a two-state solution. I don't think he wants to have one binational state. I think he realizes that the future of a Jewish state or of a democratic state as we know it would be in danger if we had one binational state such as this. So in the heat of the election, he was also making some statements like all politicians do. This specific statement was a little taken out of context, but if you took the sentence out, you could say that he said that, but he's backtracked from that. He also made a remark during the election that many of the Arabs are now going out and they're voting, and they're going to receive many mandates in masses, and so therefore the Likud should go out and also vote in masses. But I don't think that Netanyahu is a racist. He could have easily said this about any other group as well. You know, he could have said the Haredim are going out in masses and voting. Okay, the Likud should also go out and vote. So I don't think he meant that in that way. But from what I saw on the internet, he actually apologized for those remarks because I don't think he wanted to insult 21% of the population of Israel who are Israeli Arabs and are peaceful citizens and are part of the democratic process in Israel. They are the third largest party. They have 13 members of the Knesset. The United Arab Party is the third largest political party. After the Likud has 30 mandates. The Labour Party has 24 mandates. The United Arab Party has 13 mandates. What it basically means that Israel is a very democratic country. It's one of the most democratic countries in the world, and the only democracy in the Middle East. If you take a look at the per capita income of Israeli Arabs, you'll see that it's extremely high compared to other countries in the Middle East. And you'll see that the socioeconomic situation of the Israeli Arabs is improving all the time. Their birth rate is going down. And that 16% of Israeli Arabs are actually studying at Israeli universities compared to their 21% of the population, which also says something about the state of Israel. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect. There are still many things to do to become more of an egalitarian state and everything else. But when you take a look at the situation of the Israeli Arabs, you ask an Israeli Arab if he would like to move to Palestine or live under Palestinian rule, they would prefer to live under Israeli rule. They know what it's like to live in a country which has a gay community. They know what it's like to live in a country where women have equal rights. They know what it's like to live in a country where there's a very, very special value for education and everything else, and the quality of life. So, and I think we need to embrace the Israeli Arab population, and I think the Likud should do so. I know that when Arik Sharon was the prime minister, he embraced that community. and he went out and built more roads and everything else. And so I would love to see Israeli Arabs stand side by side. The instances of terrorism, by the way, from amongst Israeli Arabs is extremely low and practically non-existent because they're part of Israeli society. And so in the heat of the election, some remarks are made, but one should not draw conclusions taking certain sentences out of context.